the theme of this session is enabling adaptation. Indeed, this is a very important subject to realize the good adaptation planning and implementation. In this plenary, we have 5 excellent speakers discussing around this subject from a different aspect. And I think that we may have some time left after the presentation. Then I would like to take some discussion part at the end of this plenary. So let me start with the first presentation. And the first presentation will be made by Susan Rufo from Council on Environmental Quality, and Kathy Jacobs from Office of Science and Technology Policy. The first presentation is the joint presentation. So please.
So thank you very much for inviting me. And it's really been a pleasure to be here at the conference and to hear about all the great work that everyone's doing. I'm just going to set my timer. So I want to start just by giving a kind of overview of adaptation in the US and sort of some of the work that we're doing that relates to enabling adaptation. And I guess I'll start off by saying this is going to be sort of a whirlwind tour and just a snapshot of some of the work that's going on. There's way too much to cover and way too many pieces to the puzzle. So I just want to kind of give a few illustrative examples to show a little bit of the breadth of the work that's out there, but just keep in mind, the incredible complexity of the geography and the challenges and capacity and resources that I think, most of us are facing. And secondly, I just want to acknowledge that, I don't want to take credit for the work that I'm about to present. This is the work of colleagues in the federal government as well as outside the federal government who are really committed, creative, dedicated people across the country that are really sometimes working with federal agencies, sometimes not, but really, I think, the kind of doing the foundation of all this work across the country. So I think it's important to recognize them and celebrate their leadership, but I'm not at all trying to take credit for the work that they're doing. I just want to show that as a part of the picture in the US because it's a really important piece of the picture. And I'll also just say I've focused, because of time, mostly on just local, state, and federal work, which is not to say that the private sector, both for-profit and not-for-profit, is not doing anything. And we also have really important work being contributed by tribal governments. And I know a lot of that has been discussed in this conference already. So just generally, adaptation is happening all across the US at all different levels. Local governments, state governments, regional groupings, national levels. It's happening in the public sector, private sector, across civil society. We don't have regulatory authority to really dictate what happens at any level beyond the federal government. That's sort of historical and cultural. I don't think we'd want it any other way. I don't think it'd be welcome any other way, but that is the world that we live in. And I think the good side of that is that it's really forced us to be creative and think about how we work together without direction, and allows us to be really flexible and think about how we really can think about the real needs of each different region and each different sector in a way that's not dictated from any one central point. So together, I think the efforts add up to a huge amount of work and incredible contributions towards adaptation, but they're definitely not centrally directed. I think the key is really informal networks and groupings like this one that allow people to come together and share what's happening. So I'll just start at the local level. And I think Cynthia Rosenzweig gave us a really great introduction to the work of cities and adaptation today, and I completely agree with her. I think some of the most interesting and leading edge work really is being done at the city level. And it's being done in a very practical way. It's being done for a variety of reasons. It's called preparedness, it's called resilience, it's called adaptation. But it's all being done because city managers, mayors recognize that this is something they really have to do. And we have some cities like New York and Chicago that really are doing innovative, incredibly creative work. That's really, I think, the cutting edge of where we could be going with adaptation, things like developing open source risk models and looking at kind of their own infrastructure. But I think, I've got a couple examples here of smaller cities that are really tackling these challenges in their own way and in their own context. And we've heard at this conference about Flagstaff and Silver City and Tucson. And, it's important across the U.S., no matter the city size, the geography, these are issues that are coming up again and again. And I think a lot of advances are being made on the issue, and then we have networks like the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, ICLEI, Georgetown Climate Center, the Urban Climate Change Research Network that really are helping to knit all of these pieces together. So if we step up to the state level, we can see that the same thing is basically happening at the state level. This is from C2ES, and basically it shows how many states are already have completed adaptation plans. We've got 14 as well as several in process. And again, these plans are coming from different places. Some of them are by executive order, some of them are legislatively mandated, some of them are both. But they're happening in different ways. Some are sectorally focused, some are more comprehensive, but they're happening again because that's what states think that they need to do. And then we've got regional groupings that are coming together because they're facing common problems and they're trying to put their resources together the most effective way possible. And Susie Moser yesterday said, in the US, these groupings really don't have any authority per se. They can't tell a state or a city what to do, but they come together because they see a common cause and they can really benefit from working together. So this example is the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, which started in 2009 to tackle both mitigation and adaptation. And on the adaptation side, they're looking at things like extreme weather events, sea level rise, increased precipitation and flooding. And they knew that they had to come together and work out some of this. And they've also taken advantage of some of the federal assets that we have out in the region. The Corps of Engineers, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Geological Survey, and the EPA have all sort of helped with some of their planning and information. So what's the federal role in this mosaic of adaptation? We know that a lot of what has to happen in adaptation is very place-specific, it's very context-specific. What can federal actors and agencies do within that? We actually spent a lot of time talking to stakeholders and state governments and local governments and came up with two fundamental pieces where I think the federal government has a critical role. One is this idea of essentially enabling, providing information, services, tools to help communities make the decisions that they need to make. And the second is the idea of basically implementing within federal agencies' own missions and operations adaptation and kind of helping to lead by example. And that sort of action by federal agencies is not insignificant in the US. Federal agencies own and manage about 30% of the overall land in the US. In western states, it's a lot more. In Alaska, it's about 60%. So it's not an insignificant contribution in its own right. So we have, at the federal level, in order to help coordinate this work, an interagency climate change task force that's chaired at the White House by the Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of Science and Technology Policy, as well as with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And it includes about 20 agencies, including a lot of the all of the land management agencies. It includes science agencies, and it includes a lot of our infrastructure agencies, so agencies like the Corps of Engineers that work on our flood control, or the Department of Transportation. So we've got a mix of sort of information providers and users that come together to really think about how we can better help the nation prepare for climate change. And there's a couple of fundamental pieces of the framework that federal agencies operate under. One is this Executive Order 13514, which was signed by President Obama in 2009. And that charged the task force with really coming up with a set of principles and recommendations that federal agencies need to follow. And it also specifically requested or required that federal agencies include climate change risks and opportunities within their own agency operations, missions, and planning. So it really was sort of a sea change in how agencies started to really think about some of this. Some agencies were already there, and some agencies, I think it was really the first time that they really started to grapple with some of these issues. So fast forwarding 2 years later, basically we're starting to see some of the products come out. The task force had recommended that, among other things, these agencies get together and really work on some of the cross-cutting issues, things like water, freshwater, natural resources, and thinking about the different agencies that work on those and how do we come up with a comprehensive plan for dealing with them. So last October, we released a national action plan for managing freshwater resources under climate change. And that basically was put together by all of our water management agencies and sort of laid out their vision for what needs to be done. This summer, we expect that we'll have a national fish, wildlife, and plants climate adaptation strategy, as well as our national ocean policy implementation strategies that will be released. And both of those, the ocean implementation policy has a chapter on climate adaptation. And so both of those, again, are dealing with these cross-cutting, cross-jurisdictional issues. And the National Fish, Wildlife, and Plant Strategy actually is already itself a partnership among federal agencies, state agencies, and tribal agencies. So laying a framework for all of these different actors to work together. And then the final piece are individual federal agency adaptation plans that were required under the executive order. Those will be coming in to CEQ this summer and should basically help map out the roles of different agencies within this larger framework. So the other piece of the federal role is really this enabling piece. We have this framework now. We've identified a lot of these issues. We've identified a lot of things federal agencies need to do. But how do we really enable all of these other actors to sort of do as much as they can as well. Some of them maybe don't need us. New York City has a lot of resources. I think they're leading the way. And I think, frankly, a lot of federal agencies, maybe we can be learning a lot from some of these actors. But there's also a lot of actors that don't have the same amount of resources, and it's up to us to help provide them. So I think there's 3 areas where we've really focused, at least in these early stages, on how we can really enable adaptation. The first is this idea of providing data, information, guidance, tools to sort of help others, communities, tribes, businesses, nonprofits, to make the decisions that they need to make. And again, there are a lot of examples of this. They range from really basic scientific data all the way to very sophisticated decision support tools. But just as an example, I'll show you something that just came out this week that came out from the Forest Service. And it basically is a publication on frequently asked questions related to climate projections. And Dave Cleaves, who's the climate change advisor of the Forest Service, who is around here somewhere, said this is basically common sense climate change, which I think is a great way to put it. Because it's really about how Forest Service managers and other natural resource managers should be thinking about how they use climate projections, like understanding what their strengths and limitations are, and providing some guidance on how you might be able to use those. And some of the questions are things like, what are the main sources of uncertainty associated with climate projections? Or is downscaled data always better for my application? So I think some of the really practical questions that get at that idea of how do you really take all this information that's out there and translate it into knowledge that can really be used. Okay. The second piece of this is building regional networks that really can help provide this information in a really context-specific way and working directly with, the various stakeholders, government and non-government, federal, non-federal, and really making kind of this mosaic into a really linked piece, sort of the network of networks idea. And even in these hard budget times, the federal agencies still have lots of resources. So I think our challenge is really how do we make the best use and the most effective use of these resources to answer these questions that are coming up and developing. A lot of these, this map shows 93 different programs. This is 3 agencies: the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Department of Interior, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So just to give you a sense, all of these different programs have come up in different ways. Agencies have set up these regional networks for different missions. Some of them have been out there for years, if not decades. Some of them are relatively new. How do we fit this all together so that we can really start answering questions? I think the cross-cutting nature of all the challenges we face related to climate change makes it really necessary. And all of these folks agreed to that. It's just a question of how we do it. And that's not to say it's an easy thing to do, but it's definitely something that's underway. I think the real challenge is to do it in a way that maintains the flexibility to really respond and work with stakeholders out in the region to really understand those context-specific questions and the context-specific needs while still being sort of effective and lean as possible. And the last thing I'll talk about is basically the federal role in implementing pilots. We've talked a lot at the conference about how we monitor adaptation, how we monitor effectiveness. And a lot of that, at least initially, has to do with, are there even plans in place? I know I've talked about that already in terms of states. Are there plans in place? I think that's where we are right now. But as we start to think about moving from planning, from vulnerability assessments into actual implementation on the ground, what does that really look like? And how can we help to kind of make that transition and figure out what works and what doesn't? And I think the the federal government can help do that in places with sort of partners and local governments. And one example of this is basically the U.S. Department of Transportation, which is working along the U.S. Gulf Coast to basically identify climate-related risks to transportation infrastructure. And they did a first phase study at a very high level of the entire coast and found that 64% of transportation infrastructure is at risk. So now they're really taking a detailed look in a phase 2 study, Mobile, Alabama, working with local transportation authorities to figure out what's at risk and what can we really do about it. And their goal is not only to do something that's useful and meaningful for Mobile, Alabama, but to develop the kinds of tools, analyses, thought processes and other things that'll enable them to put those things to use in other places and other communities across the country. But that can't obviously be done without participation by local governments. So I will leave it at that. My colleague Kathy Jacobs, I think, will pick up on some of our more mature efforts in this area. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My job is to pick up from where Susan left off. I think many of you are probably aware there are several parts of the federal government that help work on this adaptation organization activity. And the Council on Environmental Quality works really closely with the Office of Science and Technology Policy as well as the Office of Management and Budget to coordinate across the federal government on the types of activities that we've just been describing. If I could have this slide, that would be great. And I'm going to go relatively quickly. We know there are several other sessions that we need to get to here. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to just briefly share with you is not only how the science program of the U.S. Global Change Research Program helps to support all of this, but how the National Climate Assessment does, and also how we have implemented lessons learned from these processes in enabling adaptation and mitigation. So many of you heard yesterday the Global Change Research Program has existed since 1990, and I think the most important thing to emphasize here is that we're moving from a basic science program into a program of science that's actually being deployed for societal outcomes. And the new strategic plan that just came out just about a month ago has now 4 main goals within that plan. Only one of them is advancing science. It turns out that's where the vast majority of the investment is, because that's actually what costs a lot of money to support buoys, boats, floats, satellites, models, and all of the generation of scientific information. But now there's a pretty big shift towards actually using that information to inform decisions, and I'll be describing just a little bit more about the informing decisions and sustained assessments part of this new strategic plan. So one of the biggest challenges that we have is that as climate change impacts accelerate, we start to move past the envelope of our own experience as managers and as citizens and decision makers. And how is it that science can help people make decisions and adapt to things that they've never seen before? It's one thing to adapt to a level of variability that's occurred in our lifetimes, but if we're actually looking at the kinds of impacts that have never happened since human civilization has existed, we have a very different challenge in front of us. And so we need different tools for making those kinds of leaps of faith from what we understand in science to what it is that we need to deploy in the real world. So there are now a lot of new tools that exist. The one that I'm showing here is from the NOAA Coastal Services Center, the Digital Coast program, which allows people to actually visualize what sea level rise would look like for a particular community. Within the U.S. Global Change Research Program, we're trying to really build an adaptation science program, and this is clearly an experiment, but we think it's going pretty well. We have identified several important priorities. They include identifying critical information needs for specific kinds of decisions in particular places. We're trying to make better use of social, behavioral, and economic sciences as we deploy this information. We're trying to identify science and decision support capabilities that already exist within the federal government and external to the federal government, and really knit that information together to help people have a roadmap or a capabilities map for how to get where they need to go. We need to translate information for decision makers, and there's more capacity that is needed to do that. And then integrating science into these agency adaptation plans that Susan talked about. Finally, evaluating the effectiveness of adaptation actions is an important part of what we work on. So I have mentioned briefly the fact that the National Climate Assessment is off and moving. We are working hard on really trying to develop information bases for information support, for decision support in a really inclusive and broad-based process. And among the things that we are contributing as we do that is essentially a national synthesis of the best available science. What is the absolute best job we can do of understanding what we're observing and what we expect to see in the future? We want to make that much more accessible than it's been in the past, so the entire assessment will be in a web-based format. In fact, the report will be in an e-book with all of the data behind all the conclusions linked. We're building evaluation programs that include indicators of change. We are also working on what is the plan for the sustained process and for integrating into the research program of the U.S. Global Change Research Program the perspectives that we pull in from all of the regional and sectoral groups who work on the assessment. We're also working on scenario development and new ways of using scenarios, evaluating, setting up new ways of collecting information so that we finally do have data to understand how effective adaptation and mitigation strategies are, and trying to build the foundation for adaptation networks, as Susan just described. So among the scenarios where we have developed for this next report, we have new historically developed perspectives on the important climate features in each region in the United States, and also projections of expected impacts across each of the 8 regions. We have a new sea level rise scenario that I think will be very useful for people. We've been building a very new way of engaging with partners called the NCA Network. This is essentially an agreement with a set of partners who have agreed to work with us to pull information in from their own networks and to also extend what it is that we are doing within the federal system into regional and local applications. We are pushing very hard to get the 2013 report out. The first draft will be available in December of 2012. Tomorrow, the first drafts are due from the 30 chapters, and so it's a big day tomorrow for us. And I wanted to just share a few of the lessons that we've learned and the lessons that we've implemented in this process. First of all, we've been designing the national assessment around understanding what our partners want. What is it that motivates them? What is it that they are interested in accomplishing, and trying to make sure they get that out of the process. Secondly, we've really been trying to deliberately bring together people who might not have talked to each other before. People from practitioner perspectives, academic, government, and NGOs are on every single one of our teams of people who have been asked to be authors of our chapters. We have been focusing on practical outcomes in real places using case studies and trying to encourage people who do have practical experience to really influence the outcome. We've also been working on how to reframe this in ways that it doesn't cause so much anxiety among the people that we're trying to communicate with. For example, talking about water security instead of climate change, if that seems to be a word that they have trouble with. In addition, a lot of what we've been doing is redeploying networks that already exist, and we're really sort of pulling in a lot of volunteer effort and trying to synthesize that into a coherent process that can move forward through time and continue to produce the benefits I've just been describing. We also want to model what it means to be doing adaptive management on your own organization. And so we're really trying to constantly evaluate what's working and what isn't working and make changes in order to respond to that. We've been building capacity across the country through our distributed team members and trying to help them understand how best to do assessment. And then finally, actively managing the interface between scientists and decision makers. This is something, at least from my past life, that seems like a very important thing that is not currently done well. People talk a lot about translation, but they don't talk about actually managing that conversation. And I think that that is a serious oversight. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and look forward to hearing the subsequent presentations.
Thank you very much, Sudan and Kathy. And we'll move on to the second presentation. And the second presentation will be made by Dr. Youssef Nassef from UNFCCC. And he will talk about the negotiation aspect. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Mimura. I've been asked to talk about an issue that's intimately familiar to some of you, but probably quite unfamiliar to most, which is the climate change negotiations. This is a topic that's very complicated, very labyrinthine, very difficult to explain, and recently this complexity has come in handy to me. This morning, I was stopped for speeding in my rental car by a policeman, and he asked me, what do I do for a living? So I said, I support international climate change negotiations. So he maintained a puzzled look for a few seconds and just let me go. So I guess he thought this must be an important task or something and was too embarrassed to ask what it meant. Anyway, let me explain to you by way of background what this UNFCCC business is all about. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, for short UNFCCC, is basically the world's multilateral treaty on climate change. Signed in '92 at the Earth Summit, entered into force in '94, 90 days after 50% of the parties deposited their instruments of ratification. Now we boast membership of 195 countries, which are labeled as parties in our context. It defines the collective consensus of the global community on climate change action. This consensus and the action that derives from it is reflected through decisions and conclusions adopted every year in our Conference of the Parties, as well as conclusions that are adopted by other bodies, which I will describe in a moment. The purpose of this convention is enshrined in its Article 2, the ultimate objective, which is on the screen now, which is to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And a lot of people see this and then ask me, where's adaptation? You know, it doesn't really appear very prominently there, although it does appear in the second half of the objective, which is that this should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. There's a number of adaptation provisions within the Convention in its Article 4 on funding adaptation, on planning for adaptation, although not explicitly mentioned in this ultimate objective. And this may be more of a reflection of the status of the thinking at the time in 1992, where the primary objective was to tackle the problem, and there was a sense of optimism that it would be tackled. Today, we're in a context where we're saying, no, adaptation has to be treated at an equal footing as mitigation. And it has indeed evolved over the past 20 years or so from being an ancillary topic to being one that stands alongside mitigation at an equal priority. There are many bodies that meet to negotiate different elements of climate change. The supreme body of the convention is the Conference of the Parties. Alongside that, you'll see at the top is the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. I'm sure most of you know the Kyoto Protocol. It has a parallel negotiating track. Left and right pillars here are our permanent subsidiary bodies. One is the subsidiary body for implementation, which deals with matters relating to reporting, to funding, capacity building, all implementation-related aspects. The right side, you see the SUBSTA, the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, which deals with matters relating to methodologies, science, technology, etc. Adaptation is represented in both of these bodies. In the middle, you'll notice we have some ad hoc bodies, 3 of them. One is the ad hoc working group on long-term commitments, and the other is the ad hoc working group on the Kyoto Protocol, and the third is a new one that was just operationalized last week, which is the ad hoc working group on the Durban platform. And this latter one is the one entrusted with taking us through to the next regime of commitments that will be operationalized in 2020. At the bottom, you'll see a line there called Secretariat. That's where I come from. Sometimes people just call us UNFCCC for short, but we are actually the Secretariat of the UNFCCC. Before I proceed, allow me to borrow a graph here. I borrowed this from Martin Parry. You saw it the first day. He explained it then. Then you saw it again yesterday when Richard Klein put it up. And this graph represents an IPCC table that shows the different vulnerabilities and the action that needs to be taken in different sectors depending on the global mean annual temperature changes relative to pre-industrial times. And the important thing here is if we call them region A, B, and C, and if you recall how Martin presented this, region A and C were those that were going to be tackled by existing pledges and existing mandates. The one in the middle, B, is one that you might consider to be lost space, where no current action is directly addressing it. And maybe I recall Kathy's presentation on the first day when she mentioned John Holdren's 3 categories: adapt, mitigate, or suffer. And that might be the suffer region of our political landscape. But in reality, it isn't, and I'll explain why. Because those residual losses, while may not be directly financed, and here I'm focusing on developing country support in our convention, because that's the group of countries that receives support from the convention funding mechanism. But there are other mandates in place that can deal with this space, the B space here, and I'll get to that. One of them is the work program on loss and damage that we have. Another is the Nairobi work program, basically support mechanisms that don't necessarily entail transfer of funds, but that help countries to deal with low-hanging fruit and maybe help them adopt regulatory measures, win-win solutions that could reduce their vulnerability and enhance their adaptive capacity. Now let me talk a bit about the building blocks that have been adopted by the UNFCCC process in order to move us forward in the A and B space. The C space is really the mitigation part of things. There are ongoing negotiations there. I won't go into that in detail now. But let's look at what has happened in our process, the UNFCCC process, and what is expected to happen in the future as a result of new mandates that have been put in place. First, many of you might have heard of the National Adaptation Program of Action process, NAPAS for short. This was a process created for least developed countries to communicate their urgent and immediate needs regarding vulnerability and adaptation. So far, 47 out of 48 LDC parties have submitted their NAPAs, and I believe up to now there's around 36 projects that have received funding, if I'm not mistaken. Don't have the figures with me here. But there are a number of publications that we have that explain the lessons learned in the NAPA process. It has been, in my thinking, a very successful program, not merely because it helped the LDCs identify their activities and that these are being funded, but mostly in creating awareness and creating high-level buy-in in these countries on an issue that normally does not receive any priority among all the other competing developmental priorities. So this is the NAPA process. The preparation is almost over for most LDCs. Implementation is going on to the extent that the LDCs have asked for now a process that will move them into medium and long-term planning to complement what they already have in terms of planning for urgent and immediate needs. So we have a new process now that's under construction, basically, which is that of national adaptation plans that deals with medium and long-term planning support, initially for LDCs, and subsequently other developing countries will be able to avail of the same modalities. And the focus is on medium and long-term adaptation needs. And there is a group of experts, of 13 experts, the LDC expert group, LEG for short, that is providing guidance for this process. They're producing technical guidance in a few months. And I've been talking to Provia colleagues as well about their guidance and how it links to this. So there's some synergy there that might be helpful. A third building block that we have, and this one focuses more on the substance side of things, methodologies, science, etc. The Nairobi Work Program on Impacts, Vulnerability, and Adaptation to Climate Change. The Nairobi Work Program is basically a partnership program, a collaborative platform, which aims at catalyzing action by its partners. And by virtue of being partners, they have aligned themselves with the objectives of the program, which is to enhance understanding of climate change impacts and vulnerability and to help countries in making informed decisions on vulnerability and adaptation. And when they become partners and they would like to take action in support of these objectives, they provide us what is known as an action pledge. Many people in this audience belong to organizations that are partners to the Nairobi Work Program and that have provided pledges to the program. We have 251 partners. Maybe a quarter of them are from the private sector, a third from NGOs, a fifth from international organizations, and around half of these partners have provided us with pledges. Many partners have given us more than one pledge, and we have a total of 168 pledges under the Nairobi Work Program. They span a lot of activities ranging from training programs to producing guidelines to holding conferences to doing actual community-based adaptation activities, for example. So it's a very rich range of activities, many of which are spurred by the existence of this work program. So another area of success there. One of our new endeavors was actually an initiative by the Small Island Developing States, which basically referred to that B region we saw, saying that, hey, you know, we can mitigate, we can adapt, but even when we do all this, there might still be residual damage, especially from extreme events that we may not be able to deal with and that can totally cripple our economies. So a work program was launched last year, a 2-year work program that will actually end this December, to investigate what type of action can be taken to address this type of loss and damage. And you have there some elements of the work program and 3 thematic areas. One focuses on assessment, the second focuses on approaches to address loss and damage, and the third is basically what should the convention do, the international community, to move this forward. And we're now in this second phase. And we're running a series of 4 regional workshops to see at the regional level what can be the type of arrangements that could foster work on loss and damage and help meet the needs of those vulnerable countries. A few support mechanisms. We have a financial mechanism that consists of several funds. I know I just have 1 minute, so I'll pass through this very quickly. The most recent of this is the Green Climate Fund at the bottom, and you may have heard of our future process that carries an expectation of availability of $100 billion annually as of 2020. So this is the main vehicle to carry that funding forward. It's $100 billion for both mitigation and adaptation, but there's a mandate to balance resources between those 2 areas. There's also the expert group that helps least developed countries, and there's an adaptation committee that has just been established that is supposed to provide overall guidance of all of these different instruments and building blocks on adaptation. It will be operational in a few weeks. We're still awaiting nominations from 1 missing region for experts on this committee, and it is open for observers from all kinds of organizations to come and observe the work of this committee. So some of you may have an opportunity to attend the meetings of the committee. Finally, I was asked to talk about the current state of adaptation in our convention process. And if I were to characterize it in 2 words, I say the state of adaptation is that it is in transition. We're moving from a context where adaptation was ancillary to mitigation to one where it has equal footing, and one where we had a negative type of fragmentation. I call it inefficient, and that was really one of the main reasons for calling for this whole new adaptation regime from the parties to the convention. They say it's too fragmented, things are going on in different places, we have no idea how different entities are collaborating. We need to have more of a holistic view of adaptation. And for that, the committee that I talked about was created. It's one of the solutions to this problem. So we entered into this context of defragmentation, at least in our process. But now we're seeing a new era of a good type of fragmentation. Someone referred this morning to Cynthia Rosenzweig's presentation on cities, that they've taken things in their own hands. So we have a lot of non-state actors or at a different level from national governments that are starting to do adaptation work. So this is sort of a new type of fragmentation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of action at community level, a lot of action in academic circles, etc. So constructive refragmentation, I called it here. We're moving, at least in terms of adaptation support, from having a paradigm of project-based short-term adaptation support to more programmatic longer-term one, particularly with the expectation of predictable funding, moving from largely qualitative assessments to more expanded efforts at using quantitative metrics in the work on adaptation. We're seeing this all over the place. The next presentation, I think, will be by WMO, where we will hear about the issue of data access and data production, how that is being supported. We're seeing all kinds of efforts at ranking adaptation, quantifying through indices. So there's a lot of number crunching going on that was not there before. In the past, we had very limited collaborative academic interaction on adaptation. And I mean, if we just look at this conference, you see that this is changing, and this is a new thing that only started a few years ago. We have several parallel types of mega conferences going on. One is this one is the community-based adaptation series, one is the Asia-Pacific Forum, and there's many new things going on that enable this type of academic interaction on adaptation that didn't exist before. Supply-driven research, which I think Joel Camo called curiosity-driven research. This was the case in the past. Now there's a much stronger realization that research has to respond to policy needs and has to talk to policymakers in the end for it to be deemed effective and useful. Finally, limited interest from the private sector. We've been knocking on their doors for ages. They have not been very interested. Now we're seeing an emergence of very strong interest from many private sector quarters, and I think this is the start of a very strong push forward from those quarters into adaptation action. Let me stop here. My time is up, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Youssef, for a very clear overview of the things happening regarding the enabling adaptation within and around the UNFCCC processes. Then I'd like to move on to the third presentation, which will be made by Dr. Manoba Shibamaku, who is from the WMO, and he will talk about the another international and global scale activities. So, please.
Can this be on? Okay. Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank Diana and the organizers for inviting WMO to make this presentation on the Global Framework for Climate Services. Just to give you an idea about the global framework, what I would like to do is to trace, first of all, the history of the GFCS. And you can see the history. When I mention the word history, people may think it's probably a few decades, but it's really not the case. It's only about 3 years. But a lot happened in 3 years. First of all, we organized the third World Climate Conference in 2009, and this was attended by 13 heads of state, 81 ministers, and 2,500 scientists. And one of the major outcomes of this World Climate Conference is the recommendation to establish the global framework for climate services. And following this, according to the recommendation of the WCC3, an intergovernmental meeting was organized in January 2010. And one of the major decisions made at this intergovernmental meeting is to establish the high-level task force on global framework for climate services. And the task force worked for an year, and you can see the pictures of all the members of the task force on the slide. This was headed by Dr. John Egeland, former Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and a number of distinguished scientists and experts from around the world. And they have produced the report entitled Climate Knowledge for Action, a Global Framework for Climate Services. And most important wording there is empowering the most vulnerable. I think that is the key word. Today, when we talk of adaptation, when we talk of mitigation, when we talk of actions, I think what we need to keep in mind is that we are trying to address the needs of the most vulnerable. So following this, the World Meteorological Congress met last year in the month of May, and the Congress then recommended that an implementation plan be developed, and that task was given to the Executive Council of the World Meteorological Organization, and they established a task team, what you see on the last line. The ECTT is the Executive Council task team, and now the task team is developing the implementation plan. Now, what's the major concern here for us when we talk of the global framework for climate services? Those pictures should tell you the concern that we have in the back of our mind. It is not about maintaining our quality of living or our standard of living. It's about addressing the needs of these vulnerable people who are affected by diseases, who have to deal with enormous amount of land degradation, and who have to deal with extreme events like droughts and also floods. Imagine you to be one of those people, and who do you look for? You look to the world community to help you. You look to your national planners to help you. And that's what I think the framework is now trying to do. In addition to that, when we come to providing climate services, we need to understand that many, many countries in the world, there are about 192 countries in the world, many of them lack the infrastructural, technical, human, and institutional capacities to provide high-quality climate services. What you see here in this slide on the left, these circles show regions of the world where a lot of data is not reported every day. When you get up in the morning, you turn your TV on or you turn your radio on, you are listening to the weather forecast. And you think that your National Meteorological Service, in the case of the United States, for example, National Weather Service, may be providing all the information needed. But more importantly, they are able to do their job because there is a global network of meteorological agencies around the world who contribute data every day to the global network of data. And these data are synthesized to produce the weather forecasts that you receive on your television screen. And that is only possible when all the countries around the world contribute data, because climate knows no national boundaries. We have artificial boundaries for our countries, but those are political boundaries. Climate doesn't respect those boundaries. What happens in Mexico will influence what happens in the United States. What happens in the Rockies in Canada would also influence your climate. And same is the case with many of these countries around the world. And when the data are lacking, naturally your forecasts are not accurate. So that is the reason why it's important for us to address these data gaps and make sure that these countries also come up to the level of standard that you expect. On the right-hand side, you see the categories of countries. This was data that is collected back in August of 2010. Some countries, a small number of countries, cannot provide any service. They can't even give you data. For example, Somalia, Djibouti. Some of these countries have no weather stations operating. They can't provide you any data. And then there are a large number of countries, almost up to 70 countries, that provide basic services. And then you have the more developed and advanced countries that can give you essential services, full services, and advanced services. What do I mean by these categories? So when I say basic climate services, all they can give you is observations on weather and climate, data on climate, and then some basic interaction with users. That's about it. So more than 70 countries in the world are in that category where they're just providing only basic climate services. Then you go to the next category, the essential services, the category 2, then they're able to also give you seasonal climate outlooks and also climate monitoring. But then when we talk of climate adaptation, we are talking about provision of effective tools for us to make decisions. And those will come from our ability to make decadal climate predictions, specialized climate products, long-term climate projections, and so on. So those are the full climate services. And countries like the United States, of course, they are at this level where they can provide just about anything. So our goal in the global framework for climate services is to steadily advance the countries who are in this category to the next category and so on, so that over a period of 20 years, this world of ours can give you much, much better quality information than what you have today. So the concern then is the climate services do not get to the last mile, to those who need them most. And these are the kind of people who really need that information. They need not be there in that situation where they are carrying their whatever little assets they can save in the floodwaters and they're trying to walk to the safety. That should not happen today. We should be able to give them early warnings. We should be able to put in place effective actions, predictive actions that these people can benefit from. So climate services have to reach these people, and that should be the goal. So the purpose of the Global Framework for Climate Services then is to enable better management of the risk of climate variability. In this conference over the past 3 days, you have seen in a number of sessions, almost every speaker was talking about risk management. This word climate risk management didn't exist when I was a graduate student at Iowa State back in 1973-77. Today, we are all talking about climate risk management. And that is what we are referring to in the Global Framework for Climate Services. We should be able to manage these risks better. We should be able to adapt to climate change. And that should be based upon science-based climate information and prediction. It's not about guesses. It has to be based on strong science. That information has to go into planning, into policy and practice. These 3 words are key: planning, policy, and practice. Any government anywhere in the world, if they have to do an effective job with climate change, they have to address all 3. They need to plan, they need to have effective policies in place, and they need to put in practice what is available in terms of information at the global, regional, and national scales. So the principles of the Global Framework Climate Services is to build the capacity of the vulnerable countries, as I mentioned in the first few slides. We need to ensure that these countries, the communities, have better access to climate information. And then we need to address these issues at all 3 domains, at the global level, at the regional level, and also at the national level. And more importantly, it's not enough that you use the word climate service. It has to be operational. Any service in any sector, you will call it a service only when it is operational. Take, for example, health service. Health services are truly operational because when you have a problem with health, you walk to a doctor and he provides you the service that you need. And that is an operational service because when you walk out of his dispensary, in your pocket, you have the tablets or a prescription to deal with your problem. And it's the same thing here, that we need to make the climate services operational. And the next principle is that climate service information is a public good. Nobody needs to pay for it because all of you who are taxpayers, you're already paying for establishment of the meteorological services, you are paying for the information that these people collect. So why do you need to pay again for the information? So it has to be treated as public good. And most important thing, and this has come out in many sessions in this conference, is the open exchange of data. A lot of presentations did mention this, that data are often lacking. They're not available to facilitate your research or your operational services. So free and open exchange of data is what is emphasized in the Global Framework for Climate Services. And we need to facilitate and strengthen, not duplicate. This is the most important thing today. When you talk of climate adaptation today, and some speakers did mention, that among the ministries and agencies, there is duplication going on. And in some cases, the ministries don't talk to each other. So those sort of duplications should not occur. You need to facilitate and strengthen what is existing. And then build it on user needs through better partnerships, by involving all the stakeholders. Now, the Global Framework for Climate Services is to address all sectors, whether it is agriculture or tourism, industry or whatever. But in the short term, the high-level task force recommended that 4 sectors be given priority, and this is agriculture, water, health, and disaster risk reduction. And the framework is based upon 5 pillars. First of all, it emphasizes interaction with the users at all levels, whether the policymakers in the government or private sector or research, sectors like agriculture, water, health, energy, disaster risk reduction, tourism, transport. So first of all, they have to be brought into design of this framework. So that is why we have a pillar called the user interface platform. All the user sectors must be brought, and whatever service you are trying to generate should be based upon the needs expressed by the user community. It should not be an academic exercise that you are interested in publishing a paper. It's about the users. What does the health sector need? What does the agriculture sector need? What does the energy sector need? And how do we address those services? And the second pillar is the climate services information system. And here the main emphasis is on providing information like climate outlooks, seasonal to interannual climate predictions, decadal predictions, and so on. And these are based upon establishment of the regional climate services. And I'll come to that in a minute. The other two pillars are observations and monitoring and research and modeling. These actually underpin everything else that is happening here. Unless you have a strong network of observations and monitoring, and then based upon strong research, modeling, and prediction, you really cannot come to provision of services or meeting the needs of the user community. And encompassing all these other four pillars is capacity building. When I mentioned about the developing countries that need services, we can take them one category to the other category to the other category only if the capacity is built. So this capacity building exercise is now going to address all the other four pillars. And there are several levels of domains of operation in the global framework for climate services. The first level is, of course, at the global level. As I mentioned, climate doesn't recognize national boundaries. So you need to have global cooperation, and you need to have global climate prediction products. You need to ensure that there is free and open data exchange, and that there are major capacity building initiatives. For example, like this international workshop here. There are a number of young students here from different parts of the world. And these sort of workshops, conferences, and other training initiatives must enhance the capacity of the experts from the developing countries to address these issues. And when you come to standards and protocols, it's very important that you have a global perspective. Because if each individual country has its own standard, it's a problem. And this is something I face whenever I travel. You always have to carry an adapter for your electric plug. When I'm in Europe, it's a different plug system. When I come to the United States, I must come with an adapter. If I go to some other country, another adapter, and so on. So that was because when the electrical industry was operating many years ago, these sort of standards and protocols didn't exist. Today, if you're developing a new product, take, for example, mobile phones and so on, there are protocols. The other one is the regional level. At this level, we have to support multilateral efforts to address regional needs. For example, the regional climate outlook fora that we organize based upon the needs of the user community, and it focuses on the providers of the regional climate services. And the next level is the national level. At this level, we have to ensure that at the national level, there is access to data on products. For example, many of the academic community here in the United States, you need data. You need free and open exchange of data to ensure that those data are available for the research activities that you are undertaking. And this is also true about any country, any place in the world. And information that is generated at the national level has to respond to the user requirements. And it has to be an effective and routine use of information, and it has to develop sustainable capacities. Now, what are the benefits of the global framework for climate services? When you have user-focused products, for example, if the tourism sector needs a product and we produce a product, and then that can really help the sector address the issue when there is a weather extreme. And there are other benefits that I'm not going into the details here, improved water resource management, disaster risk management, better support to planning and operation in the health sector, and for agriculture. Now, how do we measure the success in the GFCS? It's when the services are used as regular input to decisions in sensitive sectors that I mentioned, the 4 priority sectors. And you must enhance the efficiency and effectiveness. You also have to make sure that the access to information is there for you to be able to design and produce codes that help you withstand the climate extremes. Finally, the GFCS is an opportunity for working together. It's a global collective effort that is bringing together the UN family, the partners and stakeholders from different parts of the world, the national governments, the organizations, institutions. We go from observations to research to products. And WMO is only a small component of this whole exercise of the Global Framework for Climate Services. And we are now developing the implementation plan, and this is based upon the input from the user sector. We are going to develop a communication strategy and also a governance structure. And we organized a number of consultation meetings. In this exercise of developing the implementation plan, we organized meetings in different parts of the world in cooperation with several UN agencies. And finally, this slide gives you the exercise that we're going through today. Lots of deadlines. And we are trying to meet these deadlines so that when we meet the extraordinary Congress of WMO at the end of October of this year, we should have the implementation plan full and ready for the Congress to review and give us the go-ahead. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Berkmal, for introducing us the framework for the climate services, and sure it a global platform for enabling adaptation. So I'd like to move on to the last speaker. It's a little bit difficult for me to pronounce it. Sebastian Vicuna from Catholic University of Chile. So, Sebastian, yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nimura. Thank you for those who are still attending the plenary. When I was invited to give this talk by Diana Lieberman, thank you very much. My first reaction was to talk about Chile, which is what I know best, that's where I come from. But then I thought that this was a good opportunity to expand the message a little bit and talk about a group of countries that you don't hear too much about them. You haven't heard about them too much in the conference, and normally you don't hear about them too much, which is the group of middle-income countries. So based on that context, general context, and then I will present what has happened in terms of adaptation in Chile. My presentation then will have two main sections. One is to give you this broad context about what it means to be a middle-income country in terms of climate change adaptation, and then I'll tell you about the Chilean story on adaptation. So to go through my first topic, I'll base my presentation on this very nice framework that Karen O'Ryan developed some time ago, which presents two perspectives about vulnerability. One, which is the GCM future outcome type of vulnerability, and the other one, which is the socioeconomic, institutional, and many other factors, but a more of a current, actual, contextual vulnerability. Very simplistically, and I'm warning you right now that I'm going to give a lot of generalizations here in this talk, but very simplistically, you can think that adaptation can be achieved by either reducing one or the other, or ideally both of these type of vulnerabilities. So can we classify countries in terms of adaptation based on this framework? The idea is, can we put some weights on this balance? And I will claim that yes. The classification I'm going to be using is an income type of classification, the one used by the World Bank, which they divide the world in many different classes. I'm aggregating them into three broad classes: high-income level countries, middle-income countries, and low-income countries. High-income countries, you know where they are located. Middle-income countries are a lot in Latin America, Central and North Asia, and in the North and South regions in Africa. And the low-income countries are concentrated in Central Africa, South Asia, Central America, and on the landlocked countries in South America. I'm giving you those numbers to put these categories in context. They represent important proportions, each one of them, in terms of population and also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, differently depending on which type of country you're thinking on. So going back to the question, can we use this classification in terms of realizing which are the actions that this type of country should follow in terms of adaptation efforts? And if we think about the future threats, the answer would be no, a simple answer. Because my perspective, simple perspective, is that future threats are more or less equally distributed. And I'm using some IPCC AR4 figures and also a product of a synthesis of the freshwater section of that same report produced by Kundwesitz. And you can see from, especially from the second figure, for example, if we think about droughts, drought is going to affect high-income countries, all the Mediterranean Europe, middle-income countries, Southern Africa, but also low-income countries, Central America, for example. So, broadly speaking, the threat is equally distributed. But contextual vulnerability or actual vulnerability is clearly not equally distributed. And I'm using the Human Development Index as a proxy to present that idea. And here you see clearly that the countries tend to aggregate in terms of how vulnerable they are today in this contextual idea of vulnerability. So for me, this is the notion that makes the clear distinction. There is a clear difference in terms of the actual vulnerability, and so based on that, I suggest that there is a different weight that the countries should put in terms of where to worry in terms of climate change adaptation efforts. So this idea traduces in this statement that wealthiest countries have the opportunity or can worry more relatively in solving their future vulnerabilities as compared to low-income countries which have a clear and urgent need to worry about contextual vulnerability. Middle-income countries are in the middle, no pun intended. So my suggestion is that we should worry about both. So for middle-income countries, it is more evident the need to reach a confluence or a confluence of these two paths that is not as evident when you took the other two type of countries. Despite this challenge, which I think is very important, how to confront these two ideas, taking care of the current problem, but also having an important concern or awareness about the future problems. Despite this challenge, we don't see that being reflected in the amount of research that is being done in these different regions. So this is a graph produced by Mike Kiparski some time ago, which he developed. He counted the amount of research being done on different regions. And you can see that if we think Latin America as being a representative of middle-income type of countries, they are they represent relatively less amount of research than other countries, even the lowest and the highest income countries. And this is also being reflected at this conference. I took all the posters and talks, not panel sessions, but all the talks and where there was a very obvious distinction about which was the regional focus of the presentation, I came up with this graph. And if I zoom on the top 75% of the number of talks, we find that there is a great amount of presentation from both the most developed and the least developed countries. But there is a clear lack of presentations from the middle-income countries. I don't know the reasons. We can make many hypotheses for that. But you see the total numbers there show clearly there is this group of countries is subrepresented at this conference and on the research arena. We are small, but we are loud. If you were yesterday for the mariachi, so we're not that many, but we make a lot of noise. And I want to highlight that we are, Chile, the first on this group of middle-income countries. So this introduces me now to the second part of my presentation, keeping this context aside for a little bit. And I'll give you sort of like a timeline of what has happened in Chile in terms of adaptation. It's not a complete story. It doesn't include everything, but I think it's a reasonable summary of what has happened. So the prehistory, early 2000s, what we had in terms of climate change adaptation was this table. Is one, maybe you have seen it, it's in Spanish, but you might recognize this. It's one of the articles of the UNFCCC convention. So, and most countries try to put as many checks as possible in this table. And that was the type of information we had for some time in terms of how vulnerable we were to climate change. So that was prehistory. But then 2007 came, a very important year, and for us it meant a lot because it was the first time we had downscale data at the regional scale. A group of researchers from University of Chile downscaled the Hadley model via PRESIS to produce local information, and that was the first time when we realized, for example, that central Chile was projected to see a clear reduction in precipitation. But this was end of a century, one model, one scenario. What happened next? We enter into the modern era, 2007 to 2011. This was a period strongly motivated by COP15, Copenhagen, and also the momentum that was gathered by the AR4 report and the Inconvenient Truth movie. Why not? So what happened in this period? This first scenario was expanded to include more and closer scenarios, which were we were getting closer to the idea of adaptation. We were very scared about this type of results, for example, which show the percentage of models that were predicting an increase in precipitation. And as you can see, there is a very dark brown spot in the middle of the country. And so we are sad to be one of those places where the uncertainty is not big, but it's going not on the right direction. It's implying a clearly complex future for the country. That's one aspect of uncertainty. I'm going back to this notion of separating this type of countries. Dr. Munevar already talked about this lack of climate information. I think that's a clear it's an important issue about how to deal with uncertainty, and middle-income countries, again, are in the middle on this issue. But there are also some other drivers that are also can be separated among different type of countries. So what happens to other global change drivers? What happens to urbanization rates and deforestation rates, which brings a lot of uncertainty how to make projections into the future. And again, those type of uncertainties are higher in the least developed countries, and again, we are in the middle. In terms of climate information, although I guess we are not the worst of the countries, in Chile there is a lack of information at high elevations, which is a problem in all the Andean countries. What happened, what also we produced on this modern era, we were able to do a lot of sectorial impact assessments. For example, I'm showing here what is expected to happen in terms of hydropower generation. These are the inflows to the main hydropower system in central Chile, and we were able to see that there was a projection in terms of reducing inflows and also changes in the seasonality because we have snowmelt-dominated basins. Also changes in the productivity of different crops. The fact that we are a very long country allow us to see that some places we're going to have benefits, which are in this case the brownish areas, but some other, sorry, the greenish areas are the ones that are going to have benefits, and the brownish areas are the ones that are going to see impacts in terms of productivity. So far at that moment, there was a heavy weight on trying to understand this outcome type of vulnerabilities, and now we enter into contemporary history and what is happening today in the country. A very important thing that is happening is that we are about to release the first national adaptation plan on one particular sector, which is the agricultural sector. It is not a surprise that we have focused on that sector. Again, looking at these worldwide numbers, we see that urban areas, rural areas, and the agricultural sector is clearly one that has to have an important focus in this part of the world, which is not what has happened in other realities, for example, in California and Spain, where they started with a more diverse set of adaptation plans with covering different sectors. And also, there is a renewed or a new emphasis on contextual vulnerability, putting more emphasis on that part, and work that has been done at the local basin scale. That, in particular, this is the work we are doing, not the only work, but we're doing at the Global Change Research Center where I work. We're working at different basins across the country and with different realities, which is a very interesting type of research. I invite you to go to the next session where we'll be talking about the first of this basin, the Limari Basin. So just to wrap up, middle-income countries face a complex challenge when dealing with climate change, but it seems that it's not being reflected in research. Chile's path toward adaptation started heavily weighted on developing the knowledge in terms of future and outcome vulnerability, but now is turning to solve the more pressing problems of actual vulnerability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for presenting us the very unique viewpoint, including the analysis of the presentation of this conference. And the intention of my intention at the beginning of this session, I'd like to have some conversation between the speakers and the floor, but I'm sorry, the time is almost reaching the end of this session. So before closing, maybe Diana have something to say, and then I'd like to ask you to join me to give the presenter a big hand. Thank you.